She walked the school halls every morning, clipboard in hand, dealing with late passes and lunch schedules. To everyone, she was just Mrs. Henderson, the quiet assistant principal who never raised her voice. But when the lockdown alarm screamed through Jefferson High and gunshots echoed down the corridor, her 15 years of SWAT training kicked in, and suddenly, no one was questioning why she moved like she owned every shadow in that building. Welcome to the Human Stories channel, where we reveal the extraordinary heroes hiding behind ordinary faces. Before we begin today's incredible story, tell us in the comments which city around the world you're watching from. Today's story will change how you see the quiet people in your life, because sometimes the person processing your paperwork has been trained to save your life. If you believe stories of hidden guardians like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button, because the most dangerous person in the room often looks the most harmless. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Kate Henderson made her usual rounds through Jefferson High School's main corridor. Her sensible black flats clicked against polished linoleum in a rhythm that had become as predictable as the morning bell. Students barely glanced up from their phones as she passed, clipboard pressed against her navy blazer, reading glasses perched on her nose like armor against a world that had long since stopped seeing her as anything more than institutional furniture. At 42, Kate possessed the kind of unremarkable presence that administrators cultivated deliberately. Medium height, brown hair pulled into a practical bun, makeup applied with the efficiency of someone who understood that visibility was often a liability. She had perfected the art of blending into the beige walls and motivational posters that lined every public school in America. But her eyes told a different story. While her mouth smiled politely at passing teachers and her voice maintained its measured administrative tone, Kate's gaze moved with the systematic precision of someone cataloging exits, blind spots, and potential cover positions. She noted which classroom doors remained propped open, which hallway intersections offered the clearest sightlines, and how many seconds it would take to move from the main office to any point in the building. These habits were invisible to everyone, except Tyler Morrison, a 17-year-old junior, with the unfortunate combination of keen observation skills and chronic detention. Tyler had spent enough hours sitting outside Kate's office to notice things others missed. The way she positioned herself with her back to walls during conversations. How her head turned slightly toward unexpected sounds before anyone else registered them. The unconscious way her right hand sometimes moved toward her hip, as if reaching for something that wasn't there. Principal Richardson, a man who confused volume with authority, treated Kate like an exceptionally competent secretary. During faculty meetings, he assigned her tasks with the casual dismissiveness reserved for those he considered intellectually inferior. Kate accepted these assignments with the same serene expression she wore while dealing with upset parents and troubled students, never betraying the tactical assessment running constantly behind her calm exterior. The morning of November 15th began like every other. Kate arrived at 6:30, an hour before the official start of her workday, and conducted her private security sweep. She moved through empty hallways with purpose, checking that overnight maintenance hadn't left any doors unlocked, that the newly installed security cameras maintained their proper angles, and that the emergency communications system remained functional. This routine wasn't listed in her job description, The school board had no idea their assistant principal spent her early mornings evaluating defensive positions and egress routes. They simply knew that Jefferson High ran more smoothly than other schools in the district, that crisis situations somehow resolved themselves more efficiently, and that Kate Henderson possessed an uncanny ability to anticipate problems before they escalated. At 7:45, the first wave of students flooded through the main entrance, bringing their familiar chaos of backpacks, energy drinks, and adolescent drama. Kate stationed herself near the metal detectors, ostensibly to ensure compliance with the school's electronics policy, but actually to observe behavioral patterns and identify potential threats. She watched Marcus Chen struggle with his combination lock for the fourth consecutive day, noting the frustration building in his shoulders. She observed Jessica Walsh's increasingly erratic attendance pattern and the way her friends had begun avoiding her. Most importantly, she tracked the movements of Danny Reeves, a recently transferred student whose enrollment paperwork contained gaps that bothered her more than she could articulate. Danny had appeared at Jefferson 6 weeks earlier with transcripts from a school in Nevada that Kate's informal inquiries couldn't verify. His academic records showed inconsistent performance, and his disciplinary history contained vague references to anger management issues that had been resolved through counseling. What concerned Kate most was his behavior during fire drills and lockdown procedures. While other students complained about the interruptions, Danny studied the evacuation routes with the intensity of someone planning rather than participating. These concerns lived in a mental file that Kate maintained without documentation. Her official reports to Richardson contained nothing beyond standard administrative observations. The deeper analysis, the threat assessment, the behavioral profiles existed only in her trained mind, where 15 years of SWAT experience had taught her to distinguish between ordinary teenage angst and something more dangerous. The morning proceeded with typical efficiency. Kate mediated a dispute between two sophomores over a borrowed calculator, scheduled a parent conference for a chronically absent freshman, and reviewed the lunch menu for potential allergen conflicts. Her actions appeared routine to casual observers, but each task was executed with the methodical precision of someone who understood that details could mean the difference between order and chaos. At 11:15, she noticed Danny Reeves leaving his chemistry class 10 minutes before the period ended. The timing troubled her because it placed him in the hallways during a transition period when most students were occupied with instruction. Kate's internal threat assessment system, calibrated by years of evaluating dangerous situations, registered this deviation as significant. She began moving toward the east wing, maintaining her normal administrative pace while calculating angles and distances. Her route took her past 3 emergency communication stations and 2 administrative offices, where additional personnel could be summoned if necessary. To any observer, she was simply making her rounds. In reality, she was positioning herself between a potential threat and the highest concentration of students. The first shot came at 11:23. The sound shattered the institutional quiet like breaking glass, sharp and unmistakable. Kate's body responded before her conscious mind fully processed the information. 15 years of tactical training compressed into an instant of perfect clarity. She knew the location, East Wing, 2nd floor. She knew the weapon type, high-caliber handgun. She knew the trajectory, moving toward the main corridor where 300 students would be transitioning between classes in exactly 4 minutes. While alarms began wailing and voices started screaming, Kate moved with the fluid efficiency of someone who had trained for this exact scenario countless times. Her administrative facade didn't crack. It simply fell away like discarded clothing, revealing something harder and infinitely more dangerous underneath. She reached the emergency communication panel and activated the lockdown protocol with movements that were both swift and deliberate. Her voice, when it came through the intercom system, carried an authority that penetrated panic and commanded immediate attention. The tone was calm, measured, and absolutely unquestionable. Teachers who had never taken her seriously found themselves responding with military precision to instructions that felt less like suggestions and more like battlefield orders. Kate's mental map of the building shifted into tactical mode. She visualized Danny's position, calculated his likely movement patterns, and identified the optimal interception point. The main stairwell offered the best combination of containment and cover, but reaching it would require crossing 30 yards of open corridor during the exact moment when panicked students would be flooding the hallways. She moved like water through obstacles, her body automatically adjusting to maintain balance and momentum, while her mind processed multiple variables simultaneously. The sound of her sensible shoes against linoleum was replaced by something softer, more controlled. Her stride lengthened, and her center of gravity dropped as muscle memory from countless training exercises took control. The second shot came from closer range, followed by the crash of breaking glass and the high-pitched screams of teenagers who had never imagined that violence could reach them in their safe suburban sanctuary. Kate's pace never wavered. She had heard these sounds before, in places where death was a constant possibility and survival depended on maintaining clarity under pressure. She reached the main stairwell as the first wave of panicked students began streaming down from the upper floors. Their faces showed the particular kind of terror that comes from having your fundamental assumptions about safety and order suddenly shattered. Kate positioned herself at the intersection of two corridors, using her body to direct the flow of evacuating students while maintaining visual contact with the threat zone. Her hands moved to her waistband, an automatic response that found only empty space where tactical equipment should have been. For a fraction of a second, the absence of familiar weight and bulk reminded her that she was no longer Sergeant Kate Morrison of the Metropolitan SWAT Unit. She was Mrs. Henderson, assistant principal, armed with nothing more dangerous than a clipboard and 15 years of training that she had hoped never to use again. The limitation didn't slow her down. It simply shifted her tactical approach from aggressive intervention to protective positioning and threat containment. She began herding students away from the danger zone with hand signals and body language that communicated urgency without increasing panic. Her movements were economical and purposeful, each gesture designed to maximize safety while minimizing the time students spent in vulnerable positions. Tyler Morrison emerged from the crowd of evacuating teenagers with the wide-eyed expression of someone whose world had just tilted off its axis. He stopped when he saw Kate, something in her posture and bearing registering as fundamentally different from the woman who had processed his detention slips and called his parents about missed assignments. Kate's eyes met his for exactly 1 second, long enough for him to see something that made his breath catch. This wasn't the mild-mannered administrator he thought he knew. This was someone else entirely, someone who moved through crisis with the confidence of extensive experience and specialized training. The third shot rang out from directly above them, accompanied by the sound of splintering wood and panicked shouting. Kate's head tilted upward automatically, her trained hearing calculating trajectory and estimating the shooter's position with mechanical precision. The sound pattern indicated movement toward the central stairwell, exactly as she had predicted. She began ascending the stairs with controlled aggression, taking them two at a time while maintaining perfect balance and situational awareness. Her breathing remained steady and rhythmic, a product of conditioning that had been reinforced through countless high-stress scenarios. Each step was placed with deliberate intent, minimizing noise while maximizing speed. The hallway ahead was filled with smoke from an improvised explosive device that had blown out several windows and damaged the ceiling tiles. Emergency lighting cast everything in a red-tinged glow that turned familiar corridors into something alien and threatening. Kate moved through this environment like someone who had navigated similar chaos before, her eyes automatically adjusting to the reduced visibility while her other senses compensated for the limitations. She could hear Danny moving somewhere ahead of her, his breathing labored and his footsteps uneven. The sound pattern suggested someone operating under extreme stress, possibly injured or experiencing an adrenaline crash. Kate's tactical assessment categorized him as dangerous, but not professionally trained, which meant his movements would be unpredictable, but not strategically planned. The encounter happened at the intersection of the main corridor and the West Wing hallway. Danny rounded the corner, moving fast, weapon raised and eyes wild, with a combination of fear and artificial stimulation that suggested drug involvement. Kate had positioned herself in his path with calculated precision, using the structural support of a concrete pillar to provide partial cover while maintaining mobility. The moment their eyes met, time seemed to slow to the frame-by-frame progression that Kate remembered from every critical incident of her law enforcement career. Danny's weapon began to swing toward her, his finger already tightening on the trigger, with the jerky unpredictability of someone whose motor control was compromised by chemical enhancement and psychological breakdown. Kate's response was instantaneous and automatic. 15 years of close-quarters combat training compressed into a single fluid motion that covered the distance between them before Danny could complete his targeting sequence. Her right hand struck his wrist with surgical precision, hitting the exact pressure point that would temporarily paralyze his grip, while her left hand simultaneously grabbed the weapon's barrel and twisted it away from any potential targets. The disarmament technique was textbook perfect, executed with the kind of muscle memory that only comes from thousands of repetitions under controlled conditions, followed by real-world application under lethal stress. Danny's weapon clattered across the floor and came to rest against a bank of lockers, immediately transforming from an instrument of death into an inert piece of metal and plastic. But Danny wasn't finished. The drugs in his system had elevated his pain threshold and reduced his capacity for rational thought, turning him into something that fought with the desperate intensity of a cornered animal. He swung at Kate with his free hand, a wild haymaker that telegraphed its intention long before delivery. Kate ducked under the swing and stepped inside his reach, using his momentum against him, in a move that looked almost like dancing to any observer who didn't understand the biomechanics of close-quarters combat. Her elbow found the pressure point just below his sternum, with the kind of precision that temporarily interrupted his diaphragm's function, leaving him gasping and disoriented. The engagement lasted less than 20 seconds from initial contact to final restraint. Kate used a combination of joint manipulation and leverage to guide Danny to the ground in a controlled manner that minimized the risk of serious injury while ensuring that he couldn't continue to pose a threat. Her movements were efficient and professional, displaying exactly the kind of tactical proficiency that elite law enforcement units spend years developing. When the first police officers arrived on scene 8 minutes later, they found Kate sitting calmly beside an unconscious and securely restrained Danny Reeves, her administrative blazer torn, but her composure completely intact. The weapon had been secured and placed in a position where it couldn't be accessed by unauthorized personnel. Every student in the building had been accounted for and evacuated according to established protocols. The responding officers recognized the scene for what it was: a textbook example of threat neutralization executed by someone with extensive tactical training and real-world experience. One of them, a sergeant with 20 years of experience, looked at Kate with the kind of recognition that comes from shared professional background. The questions came later, along with the media attention and the inevitable administrative review. But in that moment, as emergency vehicles surrounded Jefferson High School and parents frantically searched for their children among the crowds of evacuated students, Kate Henderson sat quietly in the hallway where she had just prevented a tragedy. Her secret finally exposed, but her mission accomplished. Tyler Morrison, who had witnessed the entire encounter from a classroom window, would later tell anyone who would listen that he had always known there was something different about Mrs. Henderson. But even he couldn't have imagined that his quiet assistant principal was actually a decorated SWAT veteran who had spent 15 years protecting people from threats they never knew existed. The transformation was complete. Kate Henderson, unremarkable administrator, had revealed herself to be Sergeant Kate Morrison, guardian angel who had been hiding in plain sight, waiting for the moment when her community would need her specialized skills to survive their darkest hour. In the end, not a single student was harmed. The only casualty was the carefully constructed facade that had allowed a warrior to masquerade as a bureaucrat, protecting those who would never know how close they had come to losing everything until someone extraordinary stepped out of the shadows to save them all. Kate Henderson's story reminds us that heroes don't always wear badges or uniforms. Sometimes they wear blazers and carry clipboards, watching over us from the shadows. The next time you see someone dismissed as just an administrator or overlooked because they seem ordinary, remember this story. At the Human Stories Connell, we believe that extraordinary courage often wears the most unremarkable disguise. From which city are you watching this incredible story of hidden protection? Let us know in the comments. If this story gave you chills, if it made you wonder who might be quietly protecting you right now, share it with someone who needs this reminder. Subscribe and join our community that celebrates the secret guardians walking among us every day. Because sometimes the person you least suspect is exactly the person you need most.